Hi everyone, my name is Timothy and welcome again to another session of Meet Me on Mondays. Today we'll have our Artistic Director, Janek Schergen, who will be with us today as we speak on the Singaporean choreographer, Choo-San. So maybe the first question I'd like to ask you is, what was Choo-San's path to becoming a professional dancer?
He came from an unusual family. Born here in Singapore, of course. There were 10 children. 4 of them trained professionally. His elder sister Suni went to the Royal Ballet School in London, and his elder brother Chuchet followed her, and he also trained at the Royal Ballet School in London. And the next sister, Soo Kim, she went to the Australian Ballet School. She was actually the first intake of the beginning of the Australian Ballet School, and she trained there professionally. She and a group of people here started the Singapore Ballet Academy. And one of their students was Choo-San.
I see.
And so they weren't quite sure if Choo-San was interested in becoming a professional dancer because actually he wanted to be a pilot. Suni was his ballet teacher. His next sister that was next to him in age was Soo Kim. But the eldest sister, Soo Chin, was the one, because Choo-San was the youngest of the family. And Soo Chin was, interestingly, sort of in charge of making sure that he was dressed in the morning, that he was fed, that he got to school, that he did his homework. So he always looked at Soo Chin very much as a caring figure, where Suni was his ballet teacher and Soo Kim was his friend. So the 3 sisters formed a very specific relationship with him that was very, very different. But he was extremely close with him. And as for the fact that he was the youngest child, he was also extraordinarily close with his mother. Very tight family.
And could you share with us, where did Choo-San dance professionally?
When he was doing his studies here in Singapore, he wasn't sure if he was going to dance professionally. His father had said, you need to get your degree. So he had gone to Nanyang Primary, and then he went to Raffles Institution.
I see.
And then he went to University of Singapore. And he wanted to prove to his father that he was serious. So he got a degree in biochemistry.
I see.
Not something simple,
Yes.
biochemistry.
Yes.
And he finished his degree in biochemistry and went back to his father and said, I still want to be a dancer. And he had continued his studies as a dancer all during this time. And so he had just entered his 20s when he finished university, and so he said, I want to become a dancer professionally. He got an offer to go first to Switzerland, and he joined a very small student group in Switzerland, and from there he auditioned for the Dutch National. Dutch National Ballet is located in Amsterdam, and Choo-San was auditioned by Rudy van Danzig, who was the director of the company, and offered a position in the company. Now, at that point, he was not as experienced as some of the other dancers entering the company because he didn't come from a professional school. So he always told me that he really had to work hard. So he was very fortunate. In 1970, he was offered a contract at Dutch National with this brilliant repertory. They had all the full-length classics. They had 3 resident choreographers. So it was a little bit like a library. There were so many works that he was exposed to. It was sort of like taking a master class in choreography by being in the company. Whereas in some companies, you're really doing sort of specific kinds of works. He had this eclectic work with new works, creations, classical work, all of these things open to him. So he was in the perfect environment.
I see. I see. Would you say that his time in Amsterdam really shaped his later years as a choreographer, and that without this time in Amsterdam he would not have been the choreographer he became?
Dutch National had a choreographic workshop, and with a choreographic workshop he was offered the possibility of doing small pieces, and then there was also a school in Amsterdam that asked him to choreograph something. So he was given these opportunities to create things in an environment that was developmental, not aimed at production.
And before we move on to Choo-San's life as the choreographer, could you tell us more about Choo-San as a dancer? What was he like as a dancer?
He was exceptionally quick in movement quality. He could pick up things very, very fast. Everybody always commented on the fact that he was the most musical dancer they'd ever seen. So he was tremendously musical, sophisticated that way. He was able to reproduce choreography This is why all the choreographers liked him. You know, if they wanted something done with a certain movement quality, he was able to capture that. He turned well, he jumped well, he had good, strong technique, nice physique, good legs and feet, handsome, you know, excellent personality on stage. Good,
Nice.
good.
When did Choo-San discover his gift for choreography?
Well, like I said, he had even at SBA when he was a student, he had started choreographing small things through the workshops when he was making pieces, and there was that next stage. What am I going to do now? The interesting thing was that why did he not stay at Dutch National? There were already 3 resident choreographers. There was no place for him. You know, so finding a place as a choreographer was not so easy. He actually toyed with not becoming a choreographer, but doing Benish notation, which is written movement notation. That didn't last long. But as good fortune would have it, there was another dancer in the company, Clint Farah, who was one of his friends, and at that point, Washington Ballet in Washington, D.C. Was being founded by Mary Day, who had the Washington School of Ballet. Clint had trained there, and so because he had trained there and Miss Day was looking for a choreographer, he introduced the 2 of them to one another and said he's already done a couple of ballets, and so would you like to look at them? And so he went and he met Miss Day. He staged 2 of the ballets that he had made for this group. And from there, she offered him a position in the company as resident choreographer. And the company was just being established. It was just being founded. So it was very young dancers. They were just out of school, 18, most of them, just 18. And he had to create a repertoire because Miss Day's desire and her concept of the Washington Ballet was very specific. She wanted works that were made only for her company. The primary repertoire was works that were only made for Washington Ballet. You couldn't see them outside. So the only place you could see them was at Washington Ballet. And Choo-San was the perfect person for that. It was a wonderful situation in every way because since it was a company that needed a repertory, if he needed to make an opening ballet, he had to make an opening ballet. If it needed a dramatic ballet, he had to make a dramatic ballet. If it needed a classical ballet, he had to make he had to make the whole spectrum of pieces. He couldn't say, oh well, I'm just going to do this, because they didn't have an established repertory. And so he created a great deal of ballets at the very early days. A lot of them we still do. A lot of them you've danced, actually.
Yes. What were some of Choo-San's inspirations?
I had a thing about music. And his music choices were extraordinarily sophisticated. He rarely went back to the same composer twice. There's a couple of ballets that have the same composer, but he always was looking at new composers and new pieces of music. He listened to music a great deal of time during his time away from the company, always trying to find music for another ballet. But music certainly was a big inspiration. Poulenc, Martineau, Prokofiev, Benjamin Britten, the list goes on and on and on and on.
Could you share some of his works, notable works that were created outside of Washington Ballet?
First, let's talk about in Washington Ballet. There were pieces like Double Contrasts, Birds of Paradise, Variation Serias, In the Glow of the Night, Fives, Schubert Symphony, all pieces that were made with the dancers that he worked with every day, that he was very close with. And Choo-San didn't do vehicles. He didn't do dance, everybody stand to the side, this person's going to do a pas de deux, or this person's going to do a variation. That's not what he did. So everything was, I always said it was a more symphonic approach. It was all ingrained within the choreography. So definitely the ballets at Washington, those ballets were focused on the dancers of the company. And he needed also to develop them artistically through the ballets, whether they needed to get stronger techniques or develop dramatically or in a neoclassical vein. So he used those ballets to do that. When he went outside, he had started to make a few ballets for notably Boston Ballet, Houston Ballet, and Dance Theatre of Harlem, and his name came to be known by Mikhail Baryshnikov, who had just taken over American Ballet Theatre. And Baryshnikov wanted to come and see some ballets, so there was a time that he appeared in Washington, and we ran through some of Choo-San's ballets for Misha to watch. And he said, I want you to make a ballet for me at American Ballet Theatre, but I want it for me and the men of the company. So he made a piece called Configurations, which is Samuel Barber music. The Barber music is so extraordinary that the composition of it won a Pulitzer Prize.
Wow.
And the man it was written for, John Browning, actually was so impressed with Choo-San's choreography. Now this is a concert soloist, Browning. He played in the pit for the ballet's opening.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
He thought it was so amazing. There was actually a TV documentary done from Channel 4 in London about the creation of the ballet. And so that was not his first outside commission, but that certainly brought him to a lot of attention. And then right after that, with Alvin Ailey American Dance Theatre, he did a piece called Spectrum. So people started, between Washington and getting outside. Joffrey Ballet did a couple of his works, Momentum, Helena. They were very interested in him as well. And he actually received an offer to be a resident choreographer at Houston Ballet, which he turned down.
I see.
That's a little known factoid.
And since we are talking about, whether Choo-San guessed your favorite ballets or the ones you didn't like, could you share with us which is your favorite ballet of Choo-San's? And in the same vein, maybe which one did Choo-San like the best?
Yeah, that was always an interesting question. There was a particular piece of his that I'm going to teach at the company in the next few weeks called Variation Serios. It's done to a Mendelssohn solo piano. I don't know why, but that ballet is purity to me. It exemplifies his movement and choreographic gift. It's gorgeous music. I just always loved Variation Serios. I think a lot of people always think that I think that Schubert's symphony is I don't necessarily. I admire Schubert's symphony because it's not every choreographer who could take a classical idiom and do something that didn't look like a copy of somebody else's ballet. It's entirely his. It has incredible dynamic to it with technical challenges and classical purity, and it's Schubert is a little gem. To me, Variations is something that's very personal. I don't think anybody else would say that it's his best ballet or their favorite ballet, but to me, it's my favorite. But if you asked him, there would only be one answer. A piece called Synonyms. That was done. We've never done it here to Benjamin Britten music. He loved Synonyms.
And as a choreographer, he had the certain temperament, as you shared, but he also have a certain style. And did his temperament affect his work? Should his nature show in his work as well? His works were very complex. If you studied them, you could see the complexity of the sophistication of the music, of the patterns, of the steps, of the counterpoint between dancers. All of those things, when you pull them apart, they're brilliant. They're the stuff of genius. They're not black and white. And so he started stripping away movements, particularly in a work that double contrast. There used to be twice as many steps in double contrast as there are now. He started stripping away movement so that the things that were really important stood out and shone. And he was much happier that way. Much happier. So he did adapt his ballets, and that one period he went through a lot of his ballets and looked at them a little bit more critically and said, okay, that's not necessary, take that out, add this, do this. So he adapted. As he grew as a choreographer, he certainly adapted. I'm perfectly aware of earlier versions of his ballets that he then made better over time. So you were always beside him in the studio, But I also understand that you had a relationship as friend, as best friends. Could you share more about it, your relationship, your personal relationship with Choo-San?
The company that I was dancing with, Pennsylvania Ballet, had done a performance in Washington, and there was a reception. And we were both at the reception. He had come to the performance, and he came up to me and he said, you know, what a nice dancer I was. And I went, thanks. And we started to talk. We were very different people. We were polar opposites as individuals. What I liked wasn't of interest to him. What he liked, I wasn't necessarily that drawn to. We were very different as human beings. You know, our professional life and our life as friends, and he was my best friend, I was his best friend. It's like taking two pieces of wood. You put them next to one another. They're always going to be different, but they're always going to be right next to each other. You know, that one's, however long they're there, they're never going to be the same thing. My friendship with him was entirely different than my professional life with him. Our friendship was the primary source of our professional relationship. It wasn't the other way around.
I see.
We were friends first that worked together. We weren't people who worked together who were also friends.
I see.
I was there to support him as a person, support him as a choreographer, and I never minded. You know, most people say, oh, isn't that a bit much to ask? And I said, no, we're friends. It's what a friend asks of another friend. I mean, there were times, but no. He was demanding. He wanted total loyalty, complete loyalty. I remember once I had a letter from Ben Harkavy that Ben was expressing some worry, and I said to Choo-San, because Choo-San knew Ben, and I said, I'm really worried about Ben. And Choo-San snapped at me. He said, do you ever worry about me like that? I said, no, you're fine. But he wanted to know that I was there for him 100%, which in the end, of course, I was.
You know, could you share what you miss most about Choo-San, since he's no longer here with us and he lives on in your memory, but which is the most treasured memory?
Well.